beyond repair that was inside it, and more importantly perhaps, because the cockpit sat on top of the Hamilcar glider, the pilots were either killed or very seriously injured with significant crush injuries. So not easy to land, certainly the bigger gliders, on this very soft and very sandy soil on in the fields around Renkum Heath.
Further south, at Joe's Bridge, which crosses the Meuse-Escaut Canal on the Dutch-Belgian border, 30 Corps began its advance north. In 1944, there was only one real road to Arnhem, and the plan was to try and channel some 30,000 vehicles along it in 3 days. Leading the column was the Guards Armoured Division, who made good progress, supported by overwhelming Allied firepower. By 7:30 in the evening, the division halted at Valkenswaard and prepared to rest for the night as ordered rather than press on. The consequences were to be catastrophic for the men of the 1st Airborne Division, who had already experienced its first major setback.
This track saw things happening, important things, over the first 3 days of the battle. On the first day, it was the route that was to be followed by the Reconnaissance Squadron, whose task was to leave the landing zones as swiftly as it could and race as fast as it could to the Arnhem Road Bridge and hold it, whilst the infantry, following up much more slowly, on foot, arrived at the bridge to set up a proper defensive perimeter. But they left the dropping zone late, for reasons which really are inexplicable. And in the time that it took them to leave the point at which they'd landed, the Germans had put up a blocking position which, almost by coincidence, placed a platoon straddling this track. They were on the high ground to the left of the track, and they were up on the railway embankment to the right of the track. And they were part of a battalion commanded by Major Sepp Kraft, which lay principally on the south side of the railway line to my right, and which was effectively the first German opposition against which the 1st Airborne Division found itself pitted. The lead section of C Troop of the Reconnaissance Squadron was racing down this road, leading the advance to the bridge. The front vehicle, the section commander, Lieutenant Peter Bucknell, had gone on some distance ahead, and Sergeant McGregor with his jeep was trying to catch the officer up when he heard machine gun fire in the distance and out of his sight. Not sure what had happened to his officer, he speeded up his vehicle and was racing down this track towards he knew not what, except that there'd been some firing and heavy machine gun firing up ahead. And as he approached through the trees, which in those days were rather less dense than they are today, he came out into a piece of open ground by a cutting to the right, and to the left was a piece of high ground, and to the right was the railway embankment. And his vehicle was shot at by heavy machine gun fire coming either from the railway embankment to my right, from the high ground to my left, or from both. And the soldiers in it did what they would always do under those circumstances. They dismounted instantly, they tried to identify where the enemy were. They found themselves overpowered by an enemy who was carrying much more firepower than they were capable of deploying, and in a very short space of time they were all wounded, apart from Sergeant McGregor, who was killed, and they were subsequently taken prisoner. Other elements of the Reconnaissance Squadron trying to get up to here to find out what was going on got involved in the melee here, but effectively, lightly equipped as they were no match for the albeit very small but powerfully armed German force, probably in platoon strength, against which they found themselves pitted. It was on this hill, to the left of the track down which the Recce Squadron was approaching, that Sepp Kraft put part of his reserve platoon. And it was from trenches rather like this one that German soldiers were able to look down on the track and watch the vehicles of the Reconnaissance Squadron approach. And of course, in those days, very much less foliage, very much lower density of trees, and so therefore their vision, their sight of what was going on, their ability to see what was going on, very much greater than it would appear at the moment. And it was from a trench like this, or trenches like this, that the first machine gun fire was put down onto those jeeps to stop them. And subsequently it was from this trench, or trenches like it, from which the mortar fire was directed from the mortar positions of Sepp Kraft's battalion, which lay to the south of the railway line. It was from this position, and one like it on the railway embankment, that the tip of the spear of 1st Airborne Division was blunted, that the recce squadron was halted, and one of the major planks of Urquhart's plan, which was to get the recce squadron to the bridge to hold it until 1st Parachute Brigade arrived on that first evening, was prevented from happening. It was, in a sense, the point at which things began to go downhill, and they'd barely landed an hour by the time it happened.
The failure of the recce squadron's coup de main was to have far-reaching consequences. 1st Parachute Brigade Commander Brigadier Lathbury, on hearing the news, set off by jeep to inform his battalion commanders that there would be no friendly force waiting for them at the bridge, but that they should press on with all speed. Meanwhile, the division's headquarters, which had been set up in the Hartenstein Hotel, was already experiencing radio problems.
The main misgiving we had was the business of communications. All our radios were based on the fact that within about a 3-mile circle, which is what they said that the Airborne Division would always land within that sort of diameter of place to the objective, we'd be fine. But our radios didn't work more than about 3 or 4 miles. And when the 1st Parachute Brigade, after landing, went off towards the bridge, and about halfway along they faded out.
Yeah, there was a factor which contributed to the bad radio communications. First of all, the sets were too light, too weak. And then secondly, a thing which the British didn't know is that the sand here contains a lot of iron, and that gives static. And even today, the Dutch army doing an exercise nearby on Ginkel Heath has trouble, and until I got cable at home I couldn't listen to the radio.
The division's commander, Major General Urquhart, did not know if Lathbury was aware of the recce squadron's fate, and so he also set off in a jeep to try and find Lathbury, who was also his deputy, and urge him on. They eventually met up while Lathbury was visiting the 3rd Battalion. But they were to find their return route blocked by the growing German defences, leaving the division without its commander and deputy for the next 2 days. But on that first day, the Germans' chain of command also suffered a major setback.
This very busy main road leading into Arnhem, known as Utrechtsweg, was, in September 1944, the route being followed by the 3rd Parachute Battalion as it made its way to the bridge on the first day of the battle. As the lead platoon came level with the junction immediately behind me here, Major General Kussin appeared from up the road and went to turn left along Utrechtsweg back into Arnhem, where he was the Arnhem town commandant, the local garrison commander. Of course, he ran into the soldiers of the 3rd Parachute Battalion, and his vehicle was very badly shot up, and he and all the occupants were killed. The real significance of Kussin's death, however, is that he was the Arnhem town commandant. He was actually the person who commanded the guard force, or the soldiers who would guard the bridge at Arnhem. And because of his death at this junction, at somewhere around 5 o'clock in the evening of the 17th September, when John Frost's battalion arrived at the bridge at 8 o'clock that night, it was virtually unguarded. And part of the reason was that the commander who would be giving those orders, who would be making that appreciation, who would be liaising with Bitterich's 2nd Panzer SS Corps to make sure garrison troops fulfilled their proper function as part of the overall plan of defeating the airborne attempt to get to the bridge, wasn't there. And in a sense, he had made the same mistake that Urquhart even then was already making, getting a long way forward, trying to find out what was going on with the forward troops, getting himself embroiled in the battle, and in this case, having himself killed, and unable therefore to influence the outcome of what was happening in Arnhem in the way in which perhaps he should.